Thank you. And Dr. Lopez de Prado, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Foster, Ranking Member Loudermilk, and distinguished members of this task force. It's an honor to be asked to contribute to this committee today. As a result of recent advances in pattern recognition, supercomputing, and big data, today machine learning algorithms can perform tasks that until recently only expert humans could accomplish. An area of particular interest is the management of investments. For two reasons. First, some of the most successful hedge funds in history happen to be algorithmic. The key advantage of algorithmic funds is that their decisions are objective, reproducible, and can be improved over time. The second advantage is that the automation enables substantial economies of scale and cost reductions. Automated tasks include order execution, portfolio construction, forecasting, credit rating, and fraud detection. Financial AI creates a number of challenges for the over 6 million people employed in the finance and insurance industry, many of whom will lose their jobs, not because they will be replaced by machines, but because they have not been trained to work alongside algorithms. The retraining of these workers is an urgent and difficult task, but not everything is bad news. As technical skills become more important in finance than personal connections or privilege upbringing, the wage gap between genders, ethnicities, and other classifications should narrow. In finance, too, math could be a great equalizer. Retraining our existing workforce is of critical importance. However, it is not enough. We must make sure that the talent that American universities help contribute and develop remains in our country. The founders of the next Google, Amazon, or Apple are this very morning attending a math or engineering class at one of our universities. Unlike in the past, odds are these future entrepreneurs are in our country on a student visa, and that they will have a very hard time remaining in the United States unless we help them. Unless we help them, they will return to their countries of origin with their fellow students to compete against us. On a different note, I would like to draw your attention to two practical examples of RegTech, that is, the application of machine learning algorithms to regulatory oversight. A first embodiment of RegTech is the crowdsourcing of investigations. One of the most challenging tasks faced by regulators is to identify market manipulators among oceans of data. This is literally a very challenging task, like searching for a needle in a haystack. A practical approach is for regulators to enroll the help of the data science community, following the example of Kaggle competitions or the Netflix Prize. Accordingly, regulators could anonymize transaction data and offer it to the worldwide community of data scientists, who would be rewarded with a portion of the fines levied by regulators against wrongdoers. The next time that financial markets experience something like the flash crash, this tournament approach could lead to a faster identification of potential market manipulators. A second embodiment of RegTech is the detection of false investment products. Academic financial journals are filled with false investment strategies as a consequence of backtest overfitting. Financial firms offer online tools to overfit backtests, and even large hedge funds fall constantly for this trap, leading to investor losses. One solution is to require financial firms to record all the backtests involved in the development of a product. With this information, auditors and regulators could compute the probability that the investment strategy is overfit, and this probability could be reported in the fund's promotional material. Finally, I would like to conclude my remarks with a discussion of bias. Yes, machine learning algorithms can incorporate human biases. The good news is we have a better chance at detecting the presence of biases in algorithms and measure that bias with greater accuracy than on humans. The reason is that we can subject algorithms to a batch of randomized control experiments and recalibrate those algorithms to perform as intended. Algorithms can assist human decision makers by providing a baseline recommendation that humans can override, thus exposing biases in humans. As algorithmic investing becomes more prevalent, Congress and regulators can play a fundamental role in helping reap the benefits of this technology while mitigating its risks. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
The Nasdaq massive growth
Dr. Lopez de Prado, you noted in your testimony that today data vendors offer a wide range of data sets. I think other members, other witnesses mentioned that, things that were not available a couple years ago, and not only the data itself, but the processing power to analyze it and the real-time delivery of that data is becoming more and more important to successfully trade on it. Could you just illuminate for us some of the more interesting data sets that you now see being used?
Certainly. It's a combination of data sets. On one hand, we have access now to credit card transactions, geolocation data, satellite images, transcriptions from earning calls, engineering data, data from engineering processes like exploration and production companies that allow us to estimate better what is the yield of various wells for extraction of oil or fracking, all sorts of data. Keep in mind, please, that 80% of all data recorded today was generated over the past 3 or 4 years, going back to history, going back to Mesopotamia. There is a lot of data around, data that we aren't even aware of, but is just being scraped from website, chats. So all of this data can be used to understand what is the psychology of people, what is the state of mind of people, understand if people are more proclived today to take risks or to, for instance, relocate their assets to fixed income instead of stocks. Try to understand from news articles, as one of my colleagues mentioned, what are the narratives associated with particular companies. So the amount of data today is staggering, and this is only going to increase because the storage of data is becoming cheaper every day, and the processing power is increasing. So this is definitely a trend that is not going to stop.
Yeah, and now that, as I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, that has a danger of driving monopoly. That the returns to scale, because you get more correlations to look at with your AI if you have the full range of data. And so this will naturally cause the smaller players in the market to not be as effective, less profitable, and ultimately. And I think that's part of probably what you're seeing in high-frequency trading, the consolidation that you're seeing there. Now, is there any way around this? And how hard should we lean against the natural tendency to monopoly here in financial trading?
Yeah. So there are two schools of thought with this regards. Number one, there are a number of academics who believe that this consolidation is not necessarily negative, in the sense that the few survivors that are able to consolidate, for instance, high-frequency trading, today are operating like utilities. They are not making the kind of returns that they were able to obtain 9 years or 10 years ago. Essentially, what happens is that they break even. These technologies are becoming so expensive that they have to spend this time and money in order to achieve a profit that is dwindling. So there is a number of academics who believe that actually consolidation is not necessarily negative. There is, on the other hand, of course, the problem that a small number of operators could have a grip on the market, and it's also could cause a domino effect if one of them fails to provide liquidity. So there is a need to strike a balance between, on one hand, preventing too much consolidation, and on the other hand, also favoring competition between these operators.
Yeah, Ms. Wagner, you mentioned, thank you, and the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Hollingsworth, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I appreciate each of you being here today, and appreciate the chairman for holding this hearing. This is an important topic, something I've been really passionate about since arriving here in Congress. And Dr. Lopez de Prado, I appreciate your comments, because what you have touched on is something that I have been an ardent believer in for a long time. And that is, number one, that the big arm of the federal government isn't going to stop the growth of this technology, isn't going to cease the investment in AI, either here or around the world. And while we can shape the context by which that technology flows, we are not going to dam up and stop that technology. And so when people say job losses may result on account of this, right, there's a lot of fear and a lot of desire to put an end to that. and to stop that. But I like how you referenced a lot of training and retraining that may need to happen. Training individuals that are graduating from school to ensure they have the skills that are necessary in a 21st century workplace, but also ensuring that those that are already in the workplace have the opportunity to get the retraining to continue their competitiveness. And as we see further growth and development in AI, it will require more and more frequent retraining to stay ahead of that, to stay relevant in that field. That is a very competitive field, right? But the second thing you touched on is something I'm even more ardent about, a lot of ardor expressed, but is we educate a lot of kids in this country. We do higher education in this country better than anywhere else in the world. We bring a lot of talent into this country. We invest a lot in those kids, and then we politely ask them to leave at the end of their tenure here, right? That is embarrassing. That is idiotic. That is stupid, and I hate that. I want to find a way to attract talent in this country and retain talent into this country. Not because I believe it's a zero-sum game, but because I believe that this country can provide a crucible for technological development that you can't find elsewhere in the world. And I think that technology will benefit humankind overall, the world, in the long run, and I want to make sure we do that. So I really appreciate you touching on those topics, and I really appreciate that investment. You have time. Ms. Wegner,
said that when we saw the human we actually thought we could take the human out of the loop in some of our processes and found out it was not a good idea, right? With some of the things that we did. I see some head nods back there. So we try to do that. So, and Dr. Lopez de Prado, you were talking about there could be some advantages to, sort of aggregating as much data in one place as we can, right? And then looking in the gaps of that data. That's the thing I've been trying to wrap my arms around. My whole job was not competition. It was to monopolize all the data, right? And then to use competition to give us the best algorithmic solutions that we could for first, second, and third order effects of what happened to a specific part of the network. This is a tough question because to be this subjective in 40 seconds is going to be probably ridiculous. But when you're looking at this, do you think, and I know this is a tough question, do you think that with all the proprietary technologies out there, do you think there will be a voluntary sharing of that data if we find something that's very good, right, across multiple sets? So, for example, another company, do you think we will have that type of sharing for proprietary solutions based on algorithmic types of analysis? Do you think that would ever happen, or do we think we have to sort of force that to happen when we monopolize that kind of data? So if that makes sense, I hope I asked that question.
Are you referring to sharing these technologies between
Yes.
private and public companies?
Yes.
Well, when you look at the NASA model, actually there has been a lot of transfer of IP between the agency and various contractors. So that could be a model that could work for the CFTC and the SEC. In particular, in my remarks, I mentioned the crowdsourcing of investigations, how several companies or private participants could establish tournaments to help agencies identify market manipulators.
Thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all so much for coming. Back in my prior life, I had a head of engineering who had a theory that I've yet to prove wrong, that he said every advance in technology gives us more precision and less knowledge. This was a guy who started with slide rules where he had to know the order of magnitude of his answer, and now he got 16 significant digits and can never remember whether it was millions or billions. And of course, in my lifetime, we've gone from foldable maps to GPS that can give me the exact latitude and longitude, and I can't tell you whether I'm north, south, east, or west of where I started. AI has always struck me as sort of putting that acceleration on steroids. And at one point, I built a genetic algorithm to predict the revenues of our utility business, and it was amazing. I cut our revenue forecast variance by 90%, and I have no idea how it worked. And that's the power and the frustration. And I mention that because I think most of you have talked about the consumer benefit that comes when we get all these AI algorithms out in the markets and we get lower trading costs, lower bid-ask spreads. And that's all terrific. The question I have, and a lot of you have also talked about bad actors, and we can put up monitoring for that, and that's also great. The concern I have is this tension between the transparency of the model and whether the model can actually effectively replicate a bad actor that we don't understand. Because it's fairly easy for me to imagine a trading algorithm that is tracking a bunch of data and has figured out how to bet on one country invading another and making money. I can imagine a trading algorithm that's looking at changes in currency flows for illegal activity that's not in itself illegal, but is arbitraging some spread that results from that. So, Ms. Wagner, I wonder if you'd comment on that tension between transparency and algorithm robustness, and to what degree we have or need regulatory tools to stipulate where we sit on that continuum.
Sure. I mean, I think transparency is absolutely vital. I think it's also very vital that regulators and the exchanges have the resources that if they note any sort of irregularity in the markets, that they can immediately identify that. And to the question of whether or not one needs to get source code, if there is a detection of some sort of illegal or irregular activity, that then the regulator requests.
But if I could just clarify, first, would you agree that the more transparent the algorithm, potentially the less powerful the algorithm?
I mean, I think to the extent that the algorithm is not subject to intellectual property rights, that transparency is absolutely vital. If we're talking about intellectual property rights in the source code of the algorithm, that's proprietary information that if it was
So by transparency, though, I'm not referring to whether or not the public has access to the algorithm. I'm referring to whether or not our human brains can understand how the algorithm works.
Got it.
I could give you the genetic algorithm I
Sure.
wrote. You couldn't understand what it's doing.
Sure. I mean, that question becomes more complicated in the machine learning context, especially. You point to an interesting question, right? As the commands become self-acting in a way, that they're basing their analysis on the existing data sets. I don't think we're totally there yet, but I think that's something we definitely need to explore. What is our policy answer to? Because that is an interesting balance.
So, question, and this is for you, but really for all the panel, is I think thinking about that problem before it gets there, because it strikes me that there will be a pressure for every trading firm to develop the most powerful algorithms, which by definition, at some level, are going to be the ones that we have the least ability to unpack and understand.
I mean, I think this is an important question that then industry should get together on and share their best practices. How do you balance that push for transparency?
Well, let me, and just anybody who thinks they've got a great answer on this, number one, how should we do that? And number two, to what degree do we need to coordinate internationally? Because even if we do everything in our country, since all these markets are so interlinked, is this a U.S. problem or is this an international problem? Does anybody have thoughts on that?
If I may, I think this is a very important distinction. Black boxes in finance tend to be less reliable than transparent solutions. In particular in finance, because we are dealing with problems where the signal-to-noise ratio is very low. Unlike, for instance, in astrophysics research, what happens, why is the signal-to-noise ratio low in finance? Well, because of competition, because of arbitrage. Otherwise, everybody would be able to extract profits from the market. So because of that, when we deploy black box solutions in finance, these solutions can identify patterns that are not real, that they are just patterns in the noise, and confound these patterns with these noisy patterns with actual signal, leading to investment strategies that will fail. So one solution would be for investors to understand very carefully when a product is based on a black box solution as opposed to a transparent machine learning solution.
Thank you. I yield back. I would welcome any of your comments. If you've got follow-up in writing, please share. Thank you.
And as I mentioned, we're likely to have another round for members that are interested here. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, who's also the chair of the Subcommittee on National Security, International Development, and Monetary Policy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate you calling this hearing, and we appreciate all of you giving us your time. I don't know how we're going to deal with AI and human beings. Long before we had flip phones, Captain Kirk had one, and long before we had the smartwatches, Mr. Spock had one, and a lot of attention is always paid to Hollywood, particularly in science fiction, and the military, our own military. And so a lot of people have their eyes on a fearful future as it relates to AI. And to be straight, I'm one of those. I'm conflicted. I know we can't hold back the wind, and it's inevitable that we're going to see more and more of this in the future, and I'm not sure that we ought to try to hold it back, but to the degree that we can control it, that's what I think we ought to do, and that's where I'm concentrating most of my interest. Dr. McElwain, first of all, thank you for being here. But I'm wondering how inclusive this new technology is right now, and what can we do to make sure that in the future that every component of our great mosaic in the United States is a part of it.
So which of these two narratives are going to end up winning, and how's it going to net out for human participation in this? Anyone who wants to tackle that tar baby?
I can start and just say that one of the foundational concepts in investing is that correlation is not necessarily causation, right? And so we have a lot of data and we can see these patterns, but you need a human to ask, what's the right question, right? I mentioned also the example of going through the news stories with Bloomberg. And they said, the key question there was to go through these news articles and not say, what do we think the author of this article wanted to get across, but what do we think people are hearing? So there are a lot of nuances, really, about how this is going to play out. And that's why, again, having sort of the collective intelligence and diverse perspectives is going to be important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Lopez de Prado, do you have a...
Yeah, I think that the two narratives have some part of truth. I think in the short term, we have reasons to be worried in terms of the transfer of knowledge and the potential displacement that will occur as these technologies are more broadly deployed. But I think in the long term, we have reasons to be optimistic because the next generation will be better prepared than our generation, previous generations. It is very important that we give access to education, equal access to education. It's very important that we encourage kids to learn how to program, that participate in math and engineering classes, and that we form a flexible workforce, a workforce that in the future, we don't know what these technologies will do in 20 years, that they are able to be, to engage productively.
But is there a danger that this is going to squeeze all the profitability out of financial services? That if you had complete knowledge of everything and very efficient algorithms immediately trading on that knowledge, the 30% improvement in your retirement savings, all of that money used to end up in the pockets of people with nice homes on Oyster Bay. And it's, that's sort of the nature of things. And it may be that when we get this much more efficient economy with extensive deployment of AI, just the total amount of money left to be extracted will continue to go down the same way high-frequency trading is sort of suffering that decline in margins.
Well, one view, if I may, one view is that, in fact, having such perfect market is not necessarily bad for society, meaning that the day that we go to our financial advisor and we receive the same treatment that we receive when we go to the doctor. Essentially, there is a protocol of this is what you need to invest in order to achieve your retirement goals. I think that's a good outcome.
Yeah.
And as we see...
Dr. Lopez del Prado, can you touch on the differences between automated trading, algorithmic trading, high frequency, and computer trading, how they're not all the same, and what differentiates each of those?
Yes, algorithmic trading consists in following some rules. A computer follows some rules in order to achieve a particular outcome. It does not require machine learning. Machine learning is the learning of patterns from a set of data with us directing that learning. Essentially what happens is you give to an algorithm a data set, and the data set identifies a pattern we were not aware of. So that's machine learning. What was I'm sorry, the third one, high-frequency trading?
The automated trading and high frequency as well.
Well, high-frequency trading is algorithmic trading at a fast speed. It can happen with or without machine learning. So in the early stages, 2005, high-frequency trading occurred without intelligence. But today, what we see is many liquidity providers, market makers, hedge funds deploy high-frequency solutions with machine learning embedded.
Okay. Thank you. Ms.
I'm interested in, you know, how do we do planning now for the future? For example, we just updated our anti-money laundering bill, or the Bank Secrecy Act. And I'm sitting here now, and I introduced the bill, you know, I've been feeling pretty good about myself until you guys came up today, and I'm thinking, why did we go through all of that? You know, because the bad guys are out, you know, trying to figure out how they can, you know, exploit whatever we pass legislatively. How do you see AI involved in anti-money laundering efforts, like the legislation that we hope the Senate will take up during our lifetime? Is there any way you think that can play a role, that AI can play a role in our money laundering bills, how we're trying to reduce it? We're never going to probably eliminate it.
Yeah. Well, this is a gargantuan problem, right? We have to tackle tremendous amounts of data, petabytes of data, and identify this needle in the haystack. I think a practical solution is for regulators to work together with data scientists, with the entire community, and crowdsource these problems. We need to anonymize this data and give this data to the community so that the community help us enforce the law. Of course, they can be rewarded with part of the fines levied against wrongdoers, but I think that's a very doable approach, given, number one, how difficult it would be for the agencies to develop the kind of techniques that the wrongdoers are developing for bad purposes, and number two, the amounts of data that we need to parse through.
Mm-hmm. We had the Treasury Secretary before our committee yesterday, and of course, I didn't even raise this issue. We have an agency, FinCEN, which is it's an investigatory part of the Department of Treasury, and so I'm here wondering what they're doing. Excuse me, trying to keep up with the technology and what challenges they're going to face in the future. And so, you know, you guys have destroyed almost every thing I was proud of, but we appreciate you coming here anyway. Thank you very kindly. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days with which to submit written questions for the witnesses to the chair, who will forward them to the witnesses for their response. I would like to ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days with which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. And this hearing is now adjourned.